Hello there. Today I'm going to be giving a bit of a review and generally talking about The Owl Service by Alan Garner. And I've got this lovely little book here, which is a Fontana, and I have owned it for a very, very long time because I wrote my name in it, which I haven't done since I was in my early teens. And it was definitely a second hand even back then because it's got all this underlining and cross-hatching and stuff that I would never do to a book. I think my mother would have disowned me if I'd ever done that in a book. Now let me just see. It was first published in 1967, and this is our 14th impression from September 1981. I'm hoping that somewhere it will tell me yes. The cover illustration is by Steve Lavis, and they did a fantastic job. They've managed to capture the mythic and the creepy and the modern realism all together very, very subtly in a very good way. Now, the reason I've read this book recently is because Chris and Liminal Spaces did a review, and I want to watch his deep dive, but I needed to read it first. Susan Cooper and Alan Garner were the two authors when in my teens got me into mythic fiction, fairy tales, and all of that general thing. Alan Garner, both of them, but Alan Garner especially, I think, was interested in Welsh mythology, and I've got this slight fascination with Wales, and I'm not sure if it started with Alan Garner and Susan Cooper or before, but it definitely has persisted to the modern day. Now, this is Alan Garner was originally known for his children's fantasy novels, and he always wove in traditional British fairy tales and folk tales into that, and the landscape of his novels was very much realistic England, often his native country of Cheshire, northwest England, but in this case we've got Wales. And in his early writing, he wrote a number of books that I've loved for a long time. The Weird Stone of Brisningman. You've got The Moon of Gomrath, Boneland, which I just don't, is the only one I don't own. Eliodor, which I adored. And The Owl Service in 1967. So he'd written a few fairy tale type mythology beforehand. And after that, I believe, or at least after Redshift, he turned away and started writing British folk tales as non-fiction, which I would like to read, but I've never come across any of them. I suspect it's because people who get their hands on them never let go. Okay, so with The Owl Service, we've got a slight description of the story will be that we start in Wales, but we start in a very constrained environment. We start in the bedroom of Alison. She's got a stomachache and she's staying in bed. And through her there, we get introduced to the scenario. Alison and her mother, who never actually appears on screen, but I think her name was Margaret. Something really obvious, but she never appears. This cottage is actually Alison's. Her father had died, and before he died, he transferred it to Alison's name to avoid death duties. So this is her house. But her mother, Margaret, then married Clive, who is Roger's father. And now you've got this situation where two families, each with one young teenager, emerging. So at the same time, we're introduced to, I'm going to pronounce it Gwyn, but I'm not really sure how it would be pronounced in Wales. It's spelled Gwyn. I understand that W is often U, so that would be Gwyn, and that Y is sometimes pronounced V, but on my recent trip to Cardiff, I discovered that Y isn't always V. If it was, this would be Gwyn. So I really don't know what to do with Welsh pronunciation anymore. I'm going to butcher anything in this. I just know I am. Anyway, Gwen is the son of the cook Nancy, who has been rehired and to take care of this house for the 4 weeks, I think it is, that they're going to be there. And then there is one other main character there, which is Hugh Halfbacon. Halfbacon is an English pronunciation of the Welsh. He's described as not being all there, but he does all the outside chores around the place. Nancy won't talk to him, and she's forbidden her son to talk to him. But we start in Alison's room, and there's some scratching overhead that was distracting her, and she asks Gwen to go up there and see what's happening. They go up into the roof, and they don't find any animals, anything that's making the scratching. But they do find a entire dinner set, a service, as in the owl service up there, and they bring down a plate. It's got this beautiful design. Now, if you Google online, you will actually find that it was a real-life dinner service that Alan Garner used as a inspiration for this. His grandmother, I think, maybe showed him one, and his wife took a tracing, and it could be either owls or flowers, depending on how you looked at it. She took a tracing, and when she folded together, she made a paper owl. And that's exactly what Alison starts doing. She starts tracing the plate and making all these paper owls that she puts around the place almost obsessively. Now, let's talk a little bit about fantasy, because this is a fantasy novel, and I don't know why you don't want us to talk about fantasy. We do want to talk about fantasy. Yes, we do. This is a fantasy novel, but if you read its description online, it will get called a low fantasy. So it's not a phrase that gets used much anymore, but it used to be. So these days we'd probably call this magical realism, because a low fantasy is a fantastical story set in the here and now. The Owl Service is set in here and now, at least for 1967, here and now of Wales. And everything is normal except this one small thing. And that is low fantasy. High fantasy would be if instead of in Wales, they were in the landscape of, I don't know, Lord of the Rings, or the Sookie Stackhouse universe, something like that. Actually, that could still be low fantasy. Anything that is set in a totally fantastical world where sorcery is real, the conditions are completely different, and there's no science fiction or science explanation, that is high fantasy, especially if there's epic journeys and sword fights and witches and wizards. High fantasy. If I was to write a story walking out of the house and finding a magic pebble that affects my life, that's low fantasy, or as you would call it these days, magical realism. So this is low fantasy or magical realism. Now, with the tracing of the owls, Alison starts behaving very very strangely. She traces the pattern from the plate onto paper repeatedly. At the same time, Gwen's mother, Nancy, is going off the wall about things. She doesn't want her son talking to Hugh, who's got answers. She gets furious when she finds out that he's been in the attic. When she finds out that Alison has got a plate from there, she demands it be given to Nancy with no explanation. Now, Nancy is this crazy figure that clearly knows more about the plot, but won't reveal anything except by dribs and drabs every now and then. And who is there to almost progress the plot through knowing a little bit more about it and pushing it forward. Another oddity appears when Alison gives her the plate that she demands, but there's no pattern on it. The pattern is gone. And the boys, Roger, her stepbrother, and Gwen, her whatever, go, ha ha, it was really smart of you to substitute a plate. She goes, that's it, I didn't. That was the plate. The pattern had vanished. So all these weird things keep happening. Alison becomes more obsessive and stranger and stranger. They discover that in the house's billiard room, which was probably once the dairy, a whole wall has been pebble texted, but the pebble text suddenly flies off in a very, very strange and magical realism way, and a painting is revealed there. The holiday slowly starts descending into disaster as the weird things are happening. Alice and Gwen do have a bond, which her mother objects to. And that's where this story didn't work for me as well when I was a teenager. It was my least favourite of the Alan Garners. The last couple of times I read it, I understood a little bit more, but this time I understand even more. So, what you've got is class relations, which I really didn't understand very much when I was a kid. I didn't understand the English class system at all. I still don't think I do. I think it's much more solidly in place, perhaps, than most Australians would. But it not only existed in 67, it exists now. And the class element creeps in here. So Alison and her mother apparently are a slightly higher class in some way than Clive and Roger. But of course the lowest class here is Nancy, all the Welsh in the valley, because it's only their valley, and Gwyn. They are much lower. Nancy has to work for her living. Gwyn has been sent to a grammar school, a private school by a different name, in order to improve him. But they're clawing to make their lives better, whereas the people who've taken the cottage, who are in this cottage, already have it much better than they ever will. I didn't really get that as a kid. So when Alison and Gwen start forming a connection, and Alison's mother keeps threatening her she must never see him again, I didn't get it. I didn't understand why I think she's a 16-year-old girl, didn't just tell her mother to take a flying leap. This is a 16-year-old girl who actually owns her own house. Why does she care? Now, as a much more older person, when Alison explains her relationship to her mother, now I can understand where she's coming from in a way that I had no sympathy for when I was 6. I also didn't understand the class relations. I was indignant and furious at Roger mocking Hugh, who works outside, and Gwyn because his mother is the cook. I found that all very difficult. So here we've got a book that is layers within layers. It is still young adults. It is, in a very, very subtle way, almost a love triangle between Alison and Roger and Gwyn, but it's all about class relations in ways that are very strange and tie into the story, which I'm going to tell you at the end. So that actually is a fairly major part of the whole reading experience that I never got before. Now, Alan Garner learned Welsh before writing this book, and he said in an interview at one stage that he learned Welsh in order to not use it, because he thought that by doing that he would make this Welsh setting far more authentic. It feels eerily authentic. It feels like us reading this story are the outsiders to this valley of Wales, and we hear about it again in layers, because Gwen is the one who talks about it to Alison and tells her stuff about it. He's never been there before, but Nancy grew up there, and while she fled, never went back. He says she could never stop talking about it, so he knows everything. He knows the side of the hill where the foxes climb to hide in the slate. He knows the names of every single person before he's met them. And how much Welsh he can actually speak is never really explained. He can speak some, because he talks to Hugh in Welsh, and his mother goes off the rails at him for that. But he says to her, "Ma, I've got exams coming up at school. I need to speak Welsh." And she flies off the handle again. She would never have sent him to this grammar school if it meant that he'd be speaking in Welsh. He doesn't approve of the language. And from 2026, that takes us back to the 60s, which was when, or just after, the point where kids at school could be punished for speaking Welsh, their own native language, in school, because England was trying to wipe out the language. That's my understanding of it. I'm neither English nor Welsh. Don't hate me. Correct me in the comments if I'm terribly wrong. I'm happy to be corrected. But that's my understanding. So people my grandfather's age who grew up in Wales couldn't speak a word of it because it had basically been beaten out of them in their youth. 67, I think, is the tipping point where Welsh was starting to be brought back in universities and schools. So it must be that Gwyn speaks some of it. We've got an episode, we've got a scene a bit later on where he and, is it Roger? I think it might be Roger. Roger or Alison. It's Roger. Go into the school in the village. And this is described as very, very much old setting, rural United Kingdom, similar to the historic museums I visited when I was there. This is a shop that's set up in someone's living room. So you've got a dresser, but on it you've got jars of things for sale. You've got the grandfather clock, but next to it a big vats of flour and something else that can be bought. And when they arrive, there's two village women who are talking, and they're talking in English at first, but they shift to Welsh when they arrive, and Roger says that's very rude. And Gwen says, well, is it then? How dare they speak Welsh, that being their language sort of thing. So there's a lot of social subtlety to this book, a lot more than you'd expect to be able to get into a 156-page story, which isn't actually concentrating on that. So I think I love that almost as much as I love the actual story, if you will. Hello, screaming bird. Part of this story, are we? Now, what is the actual story? Because I haven't really talked about that at all. The actual story is based on a myth from the prepare to completely and utterly mutilate this Mabinogion. Okay, there's a set of Welsh mythology. Let me see if I can find the actual spelling of it. It's a set of Mabinogion, Mabinogion. This is a set of Welsh myths, fairy stories and legends that were put together in the 1200s, if I'm not mistaken. Collected, like many old stories were, so as not to be lost. I've never actually read this one. I've read excerpts from it, but not the whole thing. Apparently there are two main source manuscripts, one from 1350 and the other one from 1410. There's some earlier fragments as well. But throughout it you've got various pre-Christian mythological stories, and the one in the owl service comes from the mythical story of a woman whose name I'm also going to slaughter, Blodwyn or Bloduft. I don't know. Pronunciation on this language kills me. Okay, what do you want, chicken? Okay. Doesn't want to hang out here, doesn't want to hang out there, doesn't want to hang out everywhere. This story is about birds and flowers. So Blodwyn, or maybe not, which is all an expression of a myth, is a woman who is made of flowers. I've read the actual story, it's pretty cool. There's this wizard, he makes a wife for a mythic figure, and he does it by collecting all sorts of flowers, flowers of oak, flowers of clover, flowers from the wildlife, and he makes her into a woman who becomes the wife of Lulor Guffith, or something like that. Broom, meadowsweet, oak, and meadowsweet definitely, because meadowsweet keeps appearing almost as a feature in here. I think the magicians may have been Math, a great name for a magician, can I just say, and Guvdion, or Guvden. And she marries this Lulor Giffiths, or however you pronounce it, and she eventually falls in love with another man. So you have a love triangle there. She isn't a real woman, and she's been made to exist solely for this person. There's some questionable ethics there, but you know, whatever. And then you've got, the story involves, I think the lover kills the husband first, but the husband also has magic, so he transforms into a bird, flies away, and then comes back. Now, there's actually a standing stone in this book as well, which draws down the story for us who don't know it. Anyhow, there's this constant emphasis in the story that she is coming, she is there, and she reappears every so many years. And she can be owls or she can be flowers, and it's up to the people who are bringing the myth down, sourcing the magic like a battery and wires is given as a simile at one stage, forcing it down into the real world from where it exists outside. It's a great story. It's eerie. It's scary. There's jealousy and grief. There's strangeness. There is so much strangeness. And even though it's a shortish book, because there's so much in there, and that the mythology is brought into it so subtly from so many different directions, it's not a fast read. It took me a couple of days to read this one, at least partly because I wanted to relish the writing. So you've got Alison. She's focusing this myth in through this dinner plates where she's tracing owls from the outside of the page. And I do thoroughly encourage you to hop online and have a look at the owl service. There are images for it in Wikipedia. In the meantime, her stepbrother Roger, who she barely knows, is a keen photographer. Back in the days when you had to buy photographic equipment at the store, develop your own, and there's a little roll that you roll onto the camera. You have to twist the thing to roll the roll on. I'm so glad those days are gone. He's found up at the river this standing stone that's got a perfect hole drilled through it, and if he looks through it, he can look through to the ridge. So he's taking photographs of that. And strangely, some of these photographs are revealing images that shouldn't be there. And that's when Hugh, who's a bit of your narrator of the mysterious mythology of the village, tells about the original Mabignon story of Bludwyn and her two lovers, which ties into the stone. But at the same time, you've got Nancy and Hugh clearly have their own participation and understanding, and the whole village knows that something is happening. Now, Hugh himself is called half wit and so forth by the English dwellers in this cottage, but he claims that the village and the valley are his to take care of, and he is regarded by the villagers with a lot more respect and awe than the English visitors to the place. So once again, you've got this strange social hierarchy of things and events in place. And the conversation that Roger and Gwyn overheard in the village store is told to us in English, so we're meant to know. The ladies are talking about how Hugh says that she's come again, and they've chosen owls, and she will go hunting. So you've got this constant sense of dread and trepidation on what will happen next throughout this book, which is quite fantastic, and I did thoroughly enjoy it. And if you're not adverse to reading young adult stories, I think you should read this if you like mythology in any sense. I now really, really want to read more of Alan Garner. And I could, and I might. Tell me if you want to. The ending gutted me. It absolutely did. It was like a huge owl had grabbed out its talons, ripped out my viscera, and started rummaging around inside. And I remember that this is why this wasn't my favourite Alan Garner when I was a kid. The same thing. The ending confused me. It mystified me. I couldn't understand it. It made no sense. I kind of hated it. But it feels as right as it feels wrong. And funnily enough, between, 12-year-old me and past Deb and current Deb, there's not a lot of difference. That ending is gutting. and I don't know how to take it. I still don't know how to take it. Yeah. Great book, strange ending. Thank you for watching. Read good books. Definitely, if you've got Alan Garner, read Alan Garner, because Alan Garner is a good book. I will be reading another author beginning with K next. Yeah. Read good books.